Hi, I'm Ula, and this is a tutorial on working with natural furs. Working with natural furs can be a little intimidating for some people at first, but hopefully after this quick tutorial, some of the anxiety that many people feel will be alleviated. Let's start with the tools you need. A sharp knife. I use an X-Acto, but a box cutter, a razor blade, anything like that will work. A triangular leather needle. It's got a very pointy end and it's blade shaped. You need strong thread. If they're thicker furs, I use waxed linen. Today I'm going to be working on rabbit hide, so I'm using a silk buttonhole thread. Binder clips. These are normal office supply binder clips, or these are quilting clips are fantastic also. I prefer the quilting clips, but binder clips work just fine. You need a ruler, some sort of a marking pen, Sharpie, ballpoint, doesn't matter what, and a mat to cut on. The mat is very important because you don't want to mess up your work surface. For this demonstration, I am using a rabbit that it was part of a coat that I got at a thrift store. You can see that it's already been commercially pieced. You can see the color change, and I don't want that for this project that I'm working on. So the first thing you do is you start with a straight edge. Just place your ruler straight onto the leather, and holding it down, just mark your straight edge. It doesn't matter what you do it with because it's going to be on the inside of whatever you're working on. Now that I have my straight edge drawn, I'm just going to start on one end. Start where this repair seam was, just for demonstration purposes. And holding the skin taut, just draw your blade gently along the line. You can see it goes just right through. You don't want to press so deep that you get the fur underneath. So just enough pressure. Maybe experiment with a little bit that's on the edge. And if you get any bumps like this where it's a little bit thicker, you can just quickly cut through that. I often just cut right along the edge of the ruler itself and don't mark the line because I've been doing this long enough. So to do that, it's the exact same thing. You just don't mark the line and you just draw down. And we're just to the end. Now the ruler's tangled up. It's a little hard going through this pre-existing seam, but that's fine. And you'll see that there's a little bit of fluff. There's always a little bit of fluff. However, if you were to do this with scissors, you would have twice as much fluff. So be prepared to have fur all over your work surface and your clothes. Now that you have your straight edges, you need to get the nap of the fur going in the same direction. You'll see this one is going that way, and that's going to go that way. So we need to flip one of them around. And I prefer, this looks better this way. You can do a little bit of futzing to see what looks better for your project. Get them back in the frame a little bit. There you go. So now all the fur is going the right direction. You're just going to put them fur sides together, just like you would with sewing with fabric. And starting at one end, we are going to get all the fur snug down into the seam and place our clips I usually do about maybe 3 inches apart. Kind of depends on the material, the fur that I'm working with, and how much I think it's going to be slippery and woodgy. Woodgy is a technical term, by the way. So just keep getting that fur back in as best you can, going the direction of the fur. And another clip. And you'll see that there's still just fluff going in the air. Not much you can do about that, so be prepared. Right, my last clip. Sometimes on longer runs like this, I also put a mark just with my marking pen midway between clips. Move that over a little bit. They're not quite evenly spaced, but it doesn't matter. I'll put a little mark on both sides. Just to help keep everything matched up, because sometimes it does want to walk. Next, you've got your threaded needle. Like I said, this is a silk buttonhole thread. I used about, I don't know, maybe a 2-foot length. Something that's not going to get tangled, but will still give you plenty to work without having to go back and rethread a lot. So it's a single layer. Double layers get too thick. And using your leather needle, start with from the back side, and you're going to go in. You're about an 1/8 of an inch down and an 1/8 of an inch from the edge. So I don't knot my thread. I find that a knot will pull through the leather over time. So I just draw the thread through. Well, you can see that though. Leave a couple of inches of tail. Go through the same hole again. Gently, there we go. Making sure that you don't pierce your original thread. It takes a couple, a little bit to get the hang of it, but once you got the hang of it, it's pretty easy to do. Pull the thread taut. There we go. And I just do a quick square knot. There's one. There we go. And now that is secure. So it's a little bit easier to work. You can just take that clip out because you're secured now. So as you go, you're going to have to continue to fight those fibers down. And that's fine. So again, from the back side, about 1/4 of an inch from your original stitch and 1/4 of an inch down. It's just a double running stitch. I'm sorry, a double whip stitch. So each stitch goes through the same hole twice, or near enough to it. Sometimes I'm a little off. But... All right, so that's 2, and you just keep going. I'm doing it at a slightly weird angle because of the camera in my way, which is why these stitches are a little bit funky looking. But through the magic of video, we are going to fast forward to the whole run being done. Okay, we are to the final stitch here. And you're just going to do the same thing to close it off. So you take your final stitch, run it through twice. There we go. And then I just knot the thread back through my previous stitch. Let's do a couple of knots on itself, and that'll keep it, well, that didn't work. That will keep it from pulling through, because otherwise the knots will just pull right through your hide. All right. And you can, depending on what you're doing with the fur, I assume you're going to be putting it onto something. You can just leave this thread hanging. If you want a finished edge, you can just run it through a couple of stitches and cut off the tail. All right. So now you have joined your pieces of thread together, or sorry, your pieces of fur together. What you need to do next is lay it out flat and just kind of gently pull the pieces to flatten the seam out a little bit. Sometimes it takes a little bit of extra woodging. You run this, just run your thumb along it. Okay, that is pretty flat. You flip it over, you can still see a little bit of the seam there. If you use your nail and kind of fluff it the wrong direction, and then pet it back down. Oof. There you go. So this is what happens when you cut all the way through to the cutting board. So this part, I went just through the leather and left the fur alone. And this one, I cut too deeply. This is also what happens when you use scissors. You get that sharp edge, and then it just doesn't quite lay right because you want it to be a little floofy on the sides. All right? So next, we are going to actually attach it to something. If you're going to attach it to something like wool felt that's not going to fray, you can just attach it directly to it. Again, I use binder clips or quilting clips. And you just put the edge of the leather right up against the edge of the fabric and clip it down. There we go. And I use the same stitch, the doubled whip stitch, but instead of using a leather needle, I just use a regular Sharps sewing needle. With rabbit fur, this will go right through the single layer of rabbit hide. With bear, cow, that sort of thing, you may need to either use a leather needle. The problem with that is it damages the fabric itself because it punches a hole through the fabric instead of going through the fibers. You can also, with thicker fabrics, or sorry, thicker hides, use pre-punch it with an awl. And I can show you how that works in just a second. But you do exactly the same stitch. So about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. And you do the doubled whip stitch. It's exactly the same. You're going to get these little things of fluff. It just is part of the nature of what you're doing with. Again, just do a squared off granny knot. I'm not going to finish this seam because this is not the project that it is intended for. So I'm just going to take that out. Now, if you are you're putting it onto a fabric that will fray, use exactly the same techniques, but you just fold that under. This is there, you can do, I usually do about 1/2 inch because that's all my seam allowances are 1/2 inch. Get that actually into the frame so you can see it. So if this fabric were to fray, it was a thinner fabric, roll it under and use the exact same process. Now you never need to roll under the fur. Because the hide, the fur, it's never going to fray. That is just what it is. If you do fold it under, over time, that edge will get really stiff and hard, and it just kind of makes a weird lump in there. It's not so bad with rabbit fur, but I recently took apart a coat that someone else made that had bear fur on it that had been rolled under, and it's just got this ledge that I'm probably going to have to steam to get out. So that is applying the fur to whatever your garment is. I use fur bits to trim coats, to trim mittens. I do a lot of hand felted mittens. So those are the basics of working with fur. And that is my basic tutorial on working with fur. If you have any questions or feedback, love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook at Ula Paulsen. That's ULA P as in Peter, AULSEN, or you can email me at ula1066@gmail.com. Thanks.